The last time I saw my mother, she was screaming at me from my uncle's driveway, telling me that if I didn't get in her car right then, I would never see her face again for the rest of my life. And the craziest part? I was only 13 years old, standing there in borrowed clothes, watching her peel out like I was the one who had done something wrong. Growing up, I learned really fast that normal wasn't something our family did. My mom raised me and my older sister on her own, but it wasn't the kind of single-parent situation where she was working 2 jobs to make ends meet and tucking us in at night. It was more like we were just kind of there, along for the ride while she bounced from boyfriend to boyfriend, from husband to husband. She had one of those somewhere in the mix too. Drugs were always around. Alcohol was always around. And us kids, we were just supposed to figure it out on our own. This is Anonymous Confessions, where we share real, raw stories from people who've been through it. If you've ever felt like you had to raise yourself, hit that like button and subscribe, because trust me, you're not alone in this. We read every single comment, and we'd love to hear your story too. By the time I turned 13, my sister was already gone. She was 16 and had moved in with friends, basically anything to get out of that house. I don't blame her one bit. So it was just me and my mom, drifting from place to place like tumbleweeds. And then one day, out of nowhere, she comes up to me and says, "We're moving." That's it. No explanation, no warning, just pack up whatever you can carry because we're leaving. Next thing I know, we're driving way out into the desert. I mean miles of nothing but sand, scrub brush, and heat waves rising off the asphalt. We pull up to this run-down house that looks like it hasn't seen a fresh coat of paint since the 70s, and my mom tells me we're renting a room here, a single room for both of us, and we're sharing it with some guy I've never met in my entire life. His name was Mike, I think. Honestly, I'm still not entirely sure. My mom didn't bother with introductions. She just walked me into this tiny room with 2 twin beds crammed against opposite walls, most of our stuff already in storage, and that was our new life. I remember the smell of that place, stale cigarettes and something musty, like the walls had been sweating for decades. The window unit AC rattled so loud you could barely hear yourself think, but it barely even worked. The desert heat would just press against the glass like it was trying to get in. I'd been there maybe a week, just long enough to start figuring out the layout of the house, where to avoid stepping because the floorboards creaked, when Mike usually left for work. I was home alone with my mom one afternoon, or what passed for alone, with Mike somewhere in the house. She was lying on the couch in our room, and at first I thought she was just taking a nap, but then I kept trying to wake her up, and she wouldn't really come to. Have you ever tried to wake someone up and realized halfway through that something is seriously wrong? That cold feeling that starts in your stomach and spreads out to your fingers and toes? She was slipping in and out of consciousness. Her eyes would flutter open for a second, but they'd just roll back in her head. She wasn't responding to me. I shook her shoulder, called her name, and nothing. Just these weird, groggy sounds, like she was fighting to stay awake but losing the battle. I knew I had to call an ambulance. That was the only thing I could think. But we didn't have a phone in our room. We'd barely had furniture. So I ran out to the living room, heart pounding in my throat, because that's where the house phone was. And Mike was on it. I stood there, trying to be polite, trying not to panic. I said, "Mike, I really need to use the phone. It's an emergency. My mom is sick, and I need to call an ambulance." He just ignored me, kept talking on the phone like I wasn't even standing there, like a 13-year-old kid was begging for help while her mom was potentially dying in the next room. I asked again. My voice was shaking by then. I told him it was serious, that she wouldn't wake up, that I needed help. He got annoyed, actually annoyed, like I was bothering him with something trivial. He waved me off, turned his back to me, and just kept talking. I'll never forget that feeling, standing there, realizing that this grown man, this stranger my mom had moved us in with, was not going to help, was not going to let me help. I didn't know what to do. I was 13. I was in a house in the middle of nowhere with a man who didn't care if my mother lived or died. So I ran. I just started running. I didn't even know where I was going, but I remembered there was a grocery store not too far away. I'd seen it when we drove in, so I took off down that desert road, the sun beating down on me, no water, no phone, nothing. It was probably the distance of several city blocks, maybe more, long enough for my lungs to burn and my legs to ache, long enough for my brain to go to 1,000 different places, imagining what I'd find when I got back, if I ever got back. When I finally made it to the grocery store, I found the payphone outside. I grabbed the receiver, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely dial. And then I realized I didn't know the address. I didn't know the name of the street we were on. I didn't know anything. So I called the only person I could think of, a friend of my mom's. I don't even remember her name now, but I remember her voice on the other end of that line. She told me to calm down, that she would call the ambulance for me. She said to stay right there at the store and she would come pick me up. I waited and waited, leaning against that payphone, watching cars go by, trying not to cry. By the time she finally pulled up, the ambulance had already been to the house and taken my mom to the hospital. I had no idea what condition she was in, no idea if she was okay. I just got in the car and went with this woman to her house, thinking it would be temporary, thinking my mom would get out of the hospital in a day or two and come get me, and everything would go back to, well, not normal, but whatever our version of normal was. Days passed. A week passed. Nothing. No phone call, no visit, no word from my mom at all. I found out later that she'd left the hospital against medical advice, just walked out. And apparently she never even contacted her friend to check on me. To this day, I still don't know what actually happened to her. She's told me different stories over the years. One time she said it was a drug overdose, Valium mixed with alcohol. Another time she claimed she had a stroke. She lies constantly. She's about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. So the truth? I'll probably never know it. This is the kind of real family drama story that stays with you, isn't it? If you're hearing this and thinking about your own family betrayal stories, we want you to know that Anonymous Confessions is a safe space to share. Hit that like button if you've ever felt abandoned and subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. Drop a comment below. We read every single one. 2 weeks passed. I was still staying with my mom's friend, but I could feel the tension building. She wasn't unkind to me, but I could tell I was becoming a problem. I was an extra mouth to feed, an extra body in the house, and she hadn't signed up for this. Finally, she sat me down and told me the words I'd been dreading. I couldn't stay there anymore. I had to find somewhere else to go. I called my sister. She was living with a friend, and I begged, hoping maybe they'd have room for one more. But her friend's mom said no. She already had 2 kids of her own, plus my sister. There was no space for me. I understood, but it still felt like another door slamming in my face. I was 13 years old, and I had nowhere to go. No parent coming for me, no safety net. Just nothing. My sister must have felt terrible, so she reached out to our aunt and uncle. I hadn't seen them in over a year, maybe longer. My mom had burned those bridges somewhere along the way, like she did with most people, but they agreed to let me stay with them. I showed up at their door with nothing but the clothes on my back and one small duffel bag, a few outfits, some cassette tapes, a couple of cheap possessions that fit in that bag. That was my entire life at 13. Everything else was in storage somewhere, or lost, or left behind. My aunt and uncle were decent people, stable. They had a real house with a yard and a fridge full of food and bedrooms that didn't smell like cigarettes. After a few days, they sat me down and offered to adopt me permanently. And honestly, I didn't know what else to do. I had no options. I said yes. For a few weeks, I let myself believe that maybe this was my new life. Maybe I could finally breathe, go to school without wondering where I'd be sleeping that night, be a normal kid for once. And then, about a month after I'd moved in, my mother surfaced. I was sitting in my cousin's room when I heard the yelling, my mom's voice shrill and angry, my uncle's voice deeper, trying to reason with her but getting louder. I sat frozen on the bed, listening to them go back and forth, knowing that whatever happened next would decide everything. Then her footsteps came down the hall. She burst into the room, wild-eyed, and started yelling at me to pack my stuff. "Get your shit and get in the car," she said. "We're leaving now." My uncle was right behind her, shouting over her shoulder. I just snapped. I couldn't take the fighting, the yelling, the chaos crashing back into my life. I ran. I pushed past them and ran out into the backyard, just trying to get away from it all. And there, standing in the grass, I made the hardest decision of my life. I told my mother, with my uncle standing there, with everything on the line, that I wanted to stay. I told her that when she got a job, when she found a real place to live, when she got herself together, I would come live with her, but not until then. You would have thought I'd stabbed her in the heart. She exploded, started crying, screaming, accusing me of abandoning her when she needed me most. She played the victim like it was an Olympic sport, making me feel like I was the one who had done something unforgivable, like a 13-year-old kid was supposed to take care of her instead of the other way around. Have you ever had someone make you feel guilty for choosing survival over sacrifice? Finally, she laid down her ultimatum. Her voice went cold and hard. She said, either you get
in that car with me right now, or you never see me again for the rest of your life. I was terrified. I was shaking, but something in me just knew. I knew I couldn't go back to that life. The desert room, the drugs, the instability, the men like Mike who wouldn't even let me call an ambulance. I couldn't do it. So I told her I was staying. I honestly thought she was bluffing. I figured she'd cool down in a few days and come back, or call, or something. But she didn't. She left, and I didn't hear from her for a really long time. Months went by. I started to believe that maybe she'd meant it. Maybe I really would never see her again. Part of me was relieved. Part of me was heartbroken. But mostly, I was just numb. If this story is hitting close to home, you're not alone. At Anonymous Confessions, we share these true family betrayal stories to remind people that we all go through hard times. If you've made it this far, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. And drop a comment below. Have you ever had to make an impossible choice to protect yourself? Then, when I was about 15 years old, a letter arrived. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from my mother, 4 or 5 pages long. And do you know what it said? It was all about how she forgave me, how she'd worked through her feelings and decided, in her generosity, to forgive me for abandoning her when she needed me most. I didn't even finish reading it. I tore it up into tiny pieces and threw it in the trash. And honestly, that's where it all ended.